the misconceptions is that it works really well only with kids, right? And it does work exceptionally well with children. But there are lots of other spaces, particularly late adulthood. So when you're looking at, not late adulthood, but early adulthood, looking at old age, I didn't see that. And I think that's why supervision is so incredibly important for all of us. Art therapy, I think I had supervision right from the get-go, end to end. So I think that's been a very different journey. And I think, yeah, most definitely. I consciously try to have creative spaces, try and pick schools. We're in the whole school application phase right now. It's terrifying, right? Because I know most schools are like drawing the creativity out of children.
Hello everyone, welcome once again to another episode of the PsyK-Talk. I'm your host Kirti Garg, a practicing psychologist and also the founder of the PsyK Life. For today's episode, we have a very special guest, Miss Aditi Kaul. She is an expressive art-based therapist, program head at Fortis Hospital, somebody I personally admire a lot, and definitely one of the most renowned professionals in the field of mental health. I'm grateful for having you here today with us, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Before we begin, I'd like to know your opinions on a podcast on psychology and mental health. What do you have to say for a podcast like the PsyK-Talk?
I am very happy that podcasts exist because I feel like more and more people are interested in understanding about psychology, everything from how to study it, where to go, how do you train, also just generally understanding more and more about mental health and where they can seek mental health help, support, trainings, all of it. So I think that podcasts are a great way to sort of have and get information out there, and the more people that can access it, the better.
Yes. Ma'am, you hold such a wide experience and I personally admire you and your work a lot. Could you help us walk through your journey as a mental health professional today?
Okay, so it's a fairly long journey. I think, so I studied psychology in school, and I think that was one tipping point for me to realize that this is what I want to do. I loved the subject. I loved, every time even they started making us do some sort of tests, etc., on our friends and for submissions.
Right.
And even with that, it was just very intriguing at the outset to start understanding yourself, how the human mind works. And then as I went into college, I started working with an NGO for the 3 years that I was there. And I think more than my education, working and actually engaging with human beings
on field,
was completely different. So, I was working with children, adults, young people on mental health, life skills, healthcare, education. We worked in street and slum communities. We worked with families, we worked with organizations that were also coming in for other different kinds of support. And I think it was just very exciting to develop programs to look at community mental health. So that's what I did essentially those 3 years. Then when I went into my master's is when I was exposed to expressive arts therapy as a workshop element in our training. It was a 2 or 3 day course, and I think by then it was my second year, and I had thought I've trained in everything and I've figured out life, mental, I'm done. I'll walk out of here and I'm going to be the ace therapist. And we had this 3 day training with this organization called Kolkata Sonved in Calcutta. And they had come in and they did a dance movement, poetry, metaphor, training workshop. And I remember finishing it and thinking, I don't think I knew what I thought I did about myself or about how you can work with people, and just what a huge gap there was when we were just looking at talk therapy and just looking at, let's say, cognitive work, which was the predominant sort of teaching format that was
What
there.
was this gap?
That you cut through. So again, cognition and talk is a very protected space, which means we're all great talkers. When you ask someone their problems, a lot of times they're able to phrase it in, really like, okay, this is what I went through, this is what happened. And words have become almost a protective mechanism for us. It's language that is developed far later. Before that, when we were younger or when we started processing information, or even now, you process in sensation, in smell, in image, in things far beyond language. And I think what I realized was we don't have a space to express that or to explore how we feel through that. that also cuts through and helps bring up a lot from your past. A lot of things you might be carrying physiologically that you can't translate inwards. So a lot of times when people would come in and say, I'm struggling with something, I know what it is, but I'm not, theek nahi lag raha. I'm not feeling okay, or I don't know how to fix it. That's when you know there's this big gap, because cognitively it's all there. Yeah, I know what to do. I should do this X, Y, Z, but I'm not getting okay, or I'm not feeling better, or something's off. There's a distinct dichotomy between cognition, emotion, or cognition, emotion, sensation. And I think that's where art therapy bridged the gap for me. And that was then my next step into then sort of engaging and training and understanding it more.
It's been more than a decade, I'm assuming, for you to be in the profession. How was the journey after all of this education?
So I think one was that it was with education. So I think that was even more exciting. I continued to train as I went along. So I worked during my bachelor's, then I had placements during my master's. Then I started doing a training course in expressive art therapy, which was more dance movement focused. Then I started working with Fortis Healthcare and parallelly training with CIAT, which was the Canadian International Institute of Art Therapy. And I think that journey was very powerful for me because I was practicing. I was able to take back work and training and combine the two, and combine cultural differences in terms of what we have here in the population, the struggles that people are facing here. Again, very different from what you classically study in a very westernized book, right? Even art therapy was extremely westernized. So how do you break that education that you're getting down, look at where it actually ties into the kind of client work we're doing here? COVID was interesting because all of that went virtual. And while talk therapy is easier to translate virtually, art therapy was like, suddenly you're in this whole other world of saying, oh my God, there's so much more we can do, which we didn't think we could.
Can you help us with an experience or an incident that happened, where you could locate this gap and work around it through art therapy?
Which gap? With the client?
Yeah.
So, that's a tough one. So let me give an example. So usually art therapy, one of the misconceptions is that it works really well only with kids, right? And it does work exceptionally well with children. But there are lots of other spaces, particularly late adulthood. So when you're looking at, not late adulthood, but early adulthood, looking at old age, looking at marital and family work. So there are lots of different spaces, trauma-centered work, where art therapy is extremely beneficial. If I were to pick an example, so let me give you maybe a couple from different parts. So with a child, I was working at some stage with a child whose parents were going through a very difficult divorce. Now this child is experiencing lots of different kinds of trauma that are happening emotionally, in visitation, in just everything that's going on at that stage for him. And one of the things that came up in the artwork was drawing out the family tree, or assigning something we call a buttanogram, is using buttons to decide, okay, this button represents my mom, this smaller button represents my dad, okay, this leftover button represents
me, probably
X person. Yeah, and different pieces. And I think you realize in metaphor what comes up when you explore. And I said, okay, why does this golden button represent mama? And why is this, Tutawa button, why did you decide this one becomes that? Oh, because he's very naughty. And he's been doing X, Y, and Z and shouts and is very scary. And a lot of those pieces which this child wasn't being able to bring up to the parent or even to me verbally in the first 4 sessions suddenly kind of came to the surface. The support systems came to the surface. So their own button was this kind of tiny little shiny button, and over that they put a piece of paper saying, but this one is hidden because no one's looking at it, no one's giving it value. And then right next to it were 3 other buttons. So I said, who are these 3 buttons? Achha, this is my dog, this is my nanny, and this is one friend in school and one teacher. So again, resourcing through metaphor is very powerful. I worked with a couple, and this is one of the first cases that came into me. And we used to work in hospital. I mean, now the rooms have evolved, but a small room with a desk in the middle and you had a computer and you had like, the beds they have for examination because you don't get the perfect art studio even if you're an art therapist. And I was sitting on the side and I had the computer next to me and the couple was opposite me and they were coming in for what then I started out with, which was the classic Masters and Johnson kind of, therapy. And then one of the things that broke was 3 months into therapy, I asked them if they were okay to try movement work. And I first gave them a journaling exercise where we were looking at talking about how I felt and what I want and translating miracle questioning into art. So miracle questions are a solution-focused technique. And they both drew out exactly the same thing. That if a magic wand was waved and what would your lives look like? They both drew these two people on vacation holding hands. And that took us to a conversation saying, Acha, then
both of you want the same thing.
What's happening? That was one tiny piece of it. Another piece of it became we started doing movement work. Now there's a very base activity which any trainer who's done one workshop in, art therapy or movement work will also do. And I remember I had just finished my movement therapy training 6 months or a year before that. And I did that, mirroring, very basic.
Mirroring,
but now mirroring done in a space where you can barely move is very different from mirroring done in a dance studio training space. So they had no space. What it did was it became a form of play. So now you had two people mirroring each other's movements, whatever they were doing, being funny, creating harder, movement pieces so the other couldn't follow, pushing, pulling, tons of laughter. Suddenly they were almost literally falling onto the table and I had to dodge. It was like I wasn't in the room anymore. And what changed was the recognition that A, they want the same thing. 2, the struggles between them are because we are not being able to say what we really feel. And 3, there is no play left in the relationship. There is a lot of task, goals, things to do. So how does one then connect at a physical level when emotionally we've got a disconnect? And that brings my brain around to the fact that a lot of times with adults, we lose that, right? We lose play. Everything is about next career shift, move, that, what am I studying? What do I want to do? Office, work, step. And I think what we lose out on is for what? To what end? Right? The symbolism of it. What is the point of life? And I think art therapy, in my experience now over the last 10 years for myself, for clients across the board, across age groups, has really allowed people to do that, which is to pause, to reflect, and to try and find balance. To start recognizing the full spectrum that it's not a fix it. I am not a problem to fix. I am a whole human being. And maybe I haven't paid attention to parts of myself or learned how to carry my trauma. And just creating a catalyst using techniques to help somebody align that is very powerful.
Ma'am, if we talk about music therapy, dance therapy, how is a proper therapeutic setting different from random singing, humming of music and random movement of body? How is it different?
So I think the base is essentially started in that, perhaps. The understanding that it isn't random. And I know what you're asking. I'll separate the two, but that these are languages we hold, right? When I'm angry and I listen to a certain kind of music or the opposite kind of music to calm down, this is where the research then started, saying, oh, okay, if I want to change heart rate, what do? I use music in training which is below resting heart rate or the same as resting heart rate so that eventually the heart rate starts mirroring that, right? So the difference is when music is cathartic for me, I'm listening or singing or engaging or writing. But when someone has researched and created evidence for it, they have actually understood how to help me alter something even at a physiological level. There is a lot of neuroscientific evidence for art-based therapy, barring all the other things that make therapy different from, let's say, talking to a friend.
Right.
So it needs to be a trained professional. It's not unlike what most of us would like to believe from the movies. We don't go for a walk on the beach together and, we don't go out and have a cup of coffee and it's you will have it in the therapist's office. The material and mediums will be provided there for you, or you will be asked to bring, let's say found objects or personal objects from your home. So it is a space which is time bound, which has a boundary to it, which is really important. And when you look at the art element of it, it's what we do personally perhaps is art for expression, right? And that also grounds us and heals us. But what art therapy comes from is one, art, two, neuroscience, which essentially focuses on how our brain codes or encodes information, including trauma, and then which parts of the brain. So, how do you look at creativity to actually ignite both parts of the brain so that problem solving, processing can happen and meaning making can happen so that you can actually work through some of that, right? You're also then working with physiology. So you're looking at how do I actually control, balance my physiological space. So when anxiety comes and I can feel it
My
physically.
breathing patterns, the way my body is
absolutely. Because you can feel it in your body. Trauma is not just
the head, right? If you could help the viewers and listeners understand an expressive art based therapy session, a typical session in very easy language, could you do that?
There is no typical session.
Okay.
And that is the joy of it. So you usually start with bringing what we call the expressive therapies continuum. So you have a range of mediums available after, of course, taking history and understanding, what's happening, what the client needs. So then you start off with that. You also get a sense of their interests, if they actually enjoy the arts, if that is something that is a voice for them. And then based on what the struggle is and what evidence shows. So, again, for example, let's say a child is coming in who has been diagnosed with ADHD, movement and visual art would be a really great combination. Or stories, narratives, and movement would be a great combination, right? More evidence there. Versus if someone's coming in, let's say, with a child is coming in with trauma, some severe trauma, there we look at a lot more play focused work. Because play therapy will have far more impact there than if I start, let's say, doing movement, right? If I'm looking at a teenager, I might actually use poetry and looking at metaphor because, again, that's a language that will come more naturally. Then we traverse the ETC, which will get boring here if someone's not trained in art therapy. But the idea is how do you move someone from where they enter? So let's say I'm very cognitive and that is my defense. I need to help move to a more sort of larger symbolic space or a space where more movement can be integrated. If I enter on the opposite side, how do I move this side on that spectrum?
So the idea is holistic. These tools for them?
Not necessarily. So it depends. So I might have a very client-led session or series of sessions. So I had a child dealing with grief who I remember walked in the second session with like a drawing file and his papers and pens and said, let's create, I want to create characters. What I did was somewhere along the way, so let's make it a comic and bring stories and narrative. And that became the meaning-making process for him through his grief, right? For somebody else walked in and said, I just want to talk. Okay. We talked, conventional, more cognitive format of therapy. Then I started bringing in collage work. Saying, okay, so you've talked about all of this, but if you were to put today in a collage, what would that look like? That came really easy because collages fall on the cognitive spectrum of the ETC. Easy, box, tick, chipkao, nothing too emotional, or at least it feels like it's not too emotional. Then we could transition to saying the next time we pulled out that collage and said, if you were to just write over the collage to describe, suddenly it brought in a more emotional element. Add a song, play music in the background in a session, which then yes, I would choose. With another client, I would ask them to bring music because this was a teen who had gone through sexual abuse and trauma. And in part, one piece of the work we did was she would carry her own music and would really associate with that music. And that became a really strong piece of pulling out lyrics. So I started getting printed lyrics of her favorite songs. And then we'd actually go through them and say, okay, why do I love this? What do I feel about this artist? And why am I inspired by her? So it really depends case to case in terms of how much I will bring in or how much, if it's the client is leading, then by all means, clients always know best. Yeah.
Right. Has there ever been a time where knowingly, unknowingly you chose a wrong tool or you somewhere understood at a later phase that, however we were working was probably not the best?
I'm sure. not wrong tool. So I'll tell you what, one of the things I've realized is that you can only go wrong if you push something at someone. If you think you know, if you go into therapy with curiosity, with a space where you know that the client knows more, your job is essentially to facilitate bringing out that knowledge and then wrapping it and sharing it and helping them reflect on it so that we can build and heal. The chances of us going wrong in the sense of like, did I say, tum visual art karo, and unne kaha, hey, I hate visual art? No. But I think, I'll tell you, this was way earlier in my career where it was actually talk therapy focused. I did transition to more art therapy even with that client, but it was working with the personality illnesses spectrum. And I think it's very long-term work, right? Working with this client for very, very long, and about 7 years by the end of it. And one of the things I realized was I hit a roadblock 2 years in, and I was like, I don't want to do this. And I remember talking to my then supervisor saying, I can't deal with this person. They're saying all of these really horrible things. And it was very interesting because, and calling me at odd hours, and I don't know how to build boundaries with them. And I remember at some stage telling the client that, you know what? I remember the client saying something about, we're going to complain against you, and you know, you gave me a look which was wrong. And so it's very hard work with personality. And I said, you know what? Sure, go ahead, right? Do what you want, I'm done. And I went back to my supervisor and he was like, why A, do you think he said this or has been saying all of this? And why B, did you react like this? And I think that's for the first time, it was very interesting to reflect and say, okay, if someone is struggling or diagnosed with borderline and narcissistic personality disorder together, what is happening when they are constantly concerned with if you're thinking about them or not thinking about them? Right? What is their social space like? What do they need out of you? What are they trying to trigger from you? And I think that was one very big learning experience where I remember very clearly that there was, like, I was like, oh no. So I didn't see that. And I think that's why supervision is so incredibly important for all of us. Art therapy, I think I had supervision right from the get-go, end to end. So I think that's been a very different journey. And I think, yeah.
Ma'am, you mentioned somewhere that when we are doing expressive arts therapy, it is research proven and you're also working on the physiology. What do you have to say about the reliability of these YouTube videos that have soothing music to sleep at night, soothing music to, you know, when you're studying to concentrate?
So, I mean, it depends on the video and it depends on the evidence around that video and who's put it out there. But honestly, one of the things with the arts is that if it feels good to you, if it is actually soothing, if you do go to sleep,
go ahead.
Why not? It's not harmful to listen to a piece of music. If you realize it's not working for you, don't do it. The same thing doesn't work for everybody. Different things work for different people. As personality types, doesn't matter how much evidence there is, right? So I think really listen to yourself becomes very key with a lot of this. And again, a YouTube video is not therapy. So there is a distinct difference between someone needing, wanting and coming in for therapy, whether it's music therapy, art therapy, someone's looking at a model where they're looking at multiple modalities, which is intermodal art therapy, which is what I essentially use, and a YouTube video. That is, it's like saying someone will listen to this and is that therapy? No, of course it's not.
Would you call yourself a creative person?
Yes.
Okay.
1000%.
Creativity?
Creativity is something all of us have, but slowly perhaps lose over time because the universe puts us into boxes and takes it away. And I have many views on this, but for example, you have 2-year-olds who are coloring on coloring books with drawings, and people who are saying andar karo, lines ke andar karo, right? I remember when I started at Fortis, one of the first workshops I drafted was something called coloring outside the lines, and it literally had a circle and color lines all around it. And you remember this, when you start giving structure to children who are thinking, growing, listening, you're already taking something away. right? I worked in inpatient, I mean, we still do inpatient work at Fortis. But when I was doing it very, for the first 5-6 years, was, I remember going to kids and they're drawing trees, if you draw a tree, ye wala cloud, ye wala. And I remember asking this child, ke bahar dekho, look at this tree. Because there happened to be a tree at that window of that room. And like, it took him 5 minutes to think about it, 4-year-old. And say, but nahi, school mein ma'am aise banati hai. So I said,
So this is right.
aap aise hi banao, right? And you realize you're taking away various things. We stop playing. Why? Because games period एक हो जाता है school में बीच में. Art class हो जाती. And suddenly our ability to remember to stay creative, which we've always had, which is what? Discovering novelty, putting together different pieces and discovering something new, which requires us to play, right? But you stop doing. So then what happens? There is one way to kick a ball in football class. There is one way to draw a picture in art class. I was kicked out of art class. I've said this on multiple platforms. In class 7. Because I didn't draw well. I don't draw well, right? But I'm exceptionally creative. But that wasn't valued. And it perhaps disappeared over time as well. And then I think it only comes back in life when we value our own creativity. We look at the world with curiosity. Everything is not as is. You start engaging with different pieces. You question different things. You try and put things together, flavors in food or, techniques in therapy. And then you get something new. And that is how the world evolves. Everybody is creative and that is unquestionable. I think that deteriorates and gets lost if we don't use it like any other muscle.
And how can we use it more frequently?
Engage, A, with curiosity, like I said. B, I think you have enough resources around you. And I think I'd learned this in COVID. So whether it was, painting with clients or on Instagram lives that we did for that entire period, with coffee grains or with haldi or, I remember a client going through very severe marital issues who finally went and got sindoor and she was like, this is going to be an important marker for me to say what I want to in that moment. And play, whether it's in your gardening, whether it's in how you cook food, experiment, whether it's in music, whether it's, talking to your family about your thoughts, your ideas. And if you're the listener on the other end or the witnesser of a piece of art that your kids brought you or an idea that your teenager has, or a novel business plan that your friend brings to you, don't shut it down. And say, ye to kabhi nahi chalega, what is this? Why isn't this red? Roses are red. Why have you made it yellow? Or whatever, right? As opposed to saying, ooh, this is so interesting. What made you think to do this? Or what happens next in the story? Or where did this business idea come from? Or how can I help you? And that's how you invest in building creativity. Now corporates are calling us at senior levels to say, please come and do workshops and trainings on creative problem solving, creative thinking and growth and development organizationally. Why? Because we've created a generation of people who are not creative thinkers, put them into corporate industries, then realize
made them think in a particular box. Correct.
Right. और फिर वो grow ही नहीं कर सकता. How will it grow? Because you have nothing else. Now you're doing. So left to right आपको खुद सोचने का वो नहीं है. You're like, आप बताओ ना कैसे करूँ? If you say left, I'll go left. So you have to. Now we're being called to rebuild that. Okay, now you come and do stuff so that our teams get creative.
And is rebuilding possible then?
Yes.
How do you do that?
Because neuroplasticity has been rediscovered. So I think the fact that one realized that neuroplasticity is lifelong. Earlier it was thought that at 25 your brain, sort of the plasticity does reduce, but it does not end, which essentially means our brain continues to form new neural pathways consistently if altered. If you change what you do and repeat that enough, you can actually change neural pathways because you change sort of feedback loops that the brain and the body have. Anything is possible.
Ma'am, do you believe yourself to be a calm and happy person?
No.
Why?
I am an anxious person who is now much calmer than I used to be. I am happy more days than not. And I think there's a lot of privilege in being able to say that. But I think these concepts which we kind of push, ke calm, happy person, sad, bad, matlab, that this is exactly what makes us unhappy. Because I think this definition of I will be happy one day, there is some final goal around it, is impossible. I don't know who decided to come up with this one, where, and along the way, I don't know whether it was like advertising or markets or who decided. But I think if you recognize that, and I read this somewhere, it was very interesting. They said that there's a very small percentage of our lives which are extreme highs and extreme lows. But the extreme lows we most definitely recognize. All the other lows which are not extreme also. So if I'm driving and I'm in terrible traffic, I'll be like, bada bura din gaya. All of that will get categorized in the lows. And the highs, only you got an A+, you graduated, you started an organization, phenomenal, A+. That was a happy day for me. That was a great day for me. And what we lose is the larger, perhaps 90%, which is just the normals, which are lovely. Like today was a beautiful sunny day. I got to spend it with my grandmother eating lunch. And it was just so nice. And normally we don't encode that. We might post it on Instagram saying, wow. But did you actually enjoy it? What were you thinking? Could you just close your eyes and sit in the sun for 5 minutes? Or you had a really great session. You don't have to be the best psychologist in the world, but you walked out of session and you were like, I think I did something. I think something changed here.
It's like if you're not happy, you're unhappy. But actually there's a continuum in between.
Absolutely. Huge continuum. And you can dance on that. And I said this earlier to somebody, and I think it is so important for me in my life, which I finally begun to find, is balance. Which means if you can even dance in the middle most of the time, of happy, sad, of anxious and calm, and definitely more anxious than calm, but we're getting there in the dance, then I think you won. It's a great place to be.
Since you mentioned balance, I know you're also a young mother. How do you try to balance your personal and professional life?
Support. It takes a village is an understatement, right? I think I love my work. I love my work. I love my kid. And there is you can't do anything without support. You can't do anything without backup. If my organization wasn't supportive, I wouldn't be able to work the way I do. If my family wasn't supportive and I didn't have backup and a grandparent to, watch over my child, I wouldn't be able to come to work. So I think to be able to have that is a lot of it, or largest part of it has to do with the support systems I have, both at work and at home. And I think the second is not to ever take away from people who are accessing that support. This is what I tell my clients, that the credit doesn't go to only your support systems, it also goes to you for then planning and accessing and saying, this is what I need because this is what I want to do. And I think that was, I think it's a bit of, I'll give myself a little bit of credit, and majority I will still give to all the anchors, but it's awesome. It's awesome to be able to have that balance. But I think if you're doing this and you have different anchors or support systems that are not as strong, please give yourself breathers and know that that whole superwoman complex that I feel like my mom's generation has and had, that you can do everything. You can cook, you can go to work, you can come home, you can check if your kids are studying or not, and you will still somehow be okay. I don't think we have to be that. I think you get to be what you want to be within the resources that you have. And as long as you're feeling happy and content with the decisions you're making, just take ownership of them. Stop trying to be what anyone expects you to be, whether it's your friends, whether it's your family, whether it's social media, I don't know, whoever is going on our head with that expectation, whether it's internal. And just be like, is this what I would like? Is this what I would want? And yeah.
Ma'am, do you think your parenting is somewhere, the approach is a little different because you are an expressive art-based therapist?
I would hope so. I would hope I'm implementing at least half, if not more, of what I have learned. But most definitely, I consciously try to have creative spaces, try and pick schools. We're in the whole school application phase right now. It's terrifying, right? Because I know most schools are like drawing the creativity out of children and are already going to put these tiny, like 3-4 year olds into boxes. So most definitely at every space that I can,
Such as some
free
examples.
play, no coloring books, only plain paper. She has a wall in our house. Now it's become white again, but which she painted, and we had finger paints, where she's basically the whole wall grew over, I think, about 6 months, and then we repainted it, and then one more wall came up and repainted it. So boundaries, she knew she only had one wall, but that wall was magnificent, right? What does that do? We never tried teaching her colors or letters or numbers or any of that. But suddenly the kid is picking up, right? Because I'm saying, oh, which color do you want? And pointed to that, and I'm like, okay, purple. So learning through play, through open engagement, stories, every night we do about 5-6 stories because we're not allowed to do any less. But just engaging in narrative stories which help children express and explore emotions, talk about things they're going through, which maybe they don't have the thoughts or the vocabulary to share without that, right? Songs, dance, music, no classes. It's been hard because I've had friends and colleagues be like, oh, we have started some children drumming on things class and some other. And I keep thinking, and I know I'm not doing it wrong because I know I tell people to do this, but no classes, no music, no jamboree, whatever all those things are, nothing. And just home, play, grandparents, as many we try now to engage with other children as much as we can. But again, a reminder to parents, before the age of 4, developmentally, they're meant to parallel play. They're not really meant to be at a benchmark of you must share, etc. It's, cooperative play really does start after 4. That's when we start looking at it. So don't panic if your child is not super excited about playing with other kids yet. These are just reminders that I have to give myself. But 100%, I endeavor every day to use my training to better my parenting.
You mentioned that as a parent, you would give credit to definitely your support system, but also to yourself. How comfortable have you become to the idea of appreciating oneself and crediting oneself and just vocalizing that yes, I'm doing something for myself?
So now a lot more. I think I was very insecure as a child. I was bullied in school. We had a group of 4 best friends, 2 who were very outstanding in different ways in school. And, me and this other friend always felt slightly lesser than them growing up. And then growing into a space where I was able to find my identity and really recognize my worth outside of perhaps what were classically valued things in school and in social settings. And I think that really helped. My work with that NGO, the training we got, the kind of like rigorous work we put in. I think just growing to understand that there are all parts of me and different parts hold value was very important. And I think now more than ever, I mean, of course I have days where the bad self-loathing days, and you're like, oh, is this okay? Am I looking okay? Am I thinking okay? Am I making the right decision? But yeah, on the whole, after conscious effort, I am most definitely at a place where I can credit myself and I remind myself. Like even now, I would have ideally said this whole village thing and then finished, but then I was like, no, yaar, I made the village happen. Yes. I reached out to people. I decided to push myself. So 100%, much more comfortable and conscious about doing that for myself now.
And still on that ladder, I mean.
100%.
Still working on that. How do you take out time for yourself in terms of self-care, especially when dealing with burnout?
So I think with burnout, work, I look at supervision. I think supervision is also a form of self-care for me because I think it helps clear my mind. It helps me navigate where I am at with clients, with myself professionally. And that's a really helpful way for me to calm just my nerves or my head around what I'm doing. Then, as in terms of downtime, I love finding new spaces of exercise or movement in my life. I started doing something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because of my younger brother who does it, and I'm not doing so well at it and not really being regular with it. But I'll do that. I'll do a dance class. Suddenly in the middle, I'll decide to play a sport. Of a different kind. So I think I really like novelty, which good because that means I'm trying to live also by my art therapy principles and discover new things which challenge me and which excite me. I never used to like to cook, but I think now I enjoy baking. Sometimes, very rarely, but when I do, it's
fun.
super fun. Yeah, and the outcome, if it happens to taste nice, is like icing on the cake. But yeah, the more novel things I can do, spending time with like really core people, family, and friends who essentially are extended family, basically for me, is very nice. I think those are travel if and when you get to do it. So I think these are ways for me to just keep a balance in my system.
You've shared so much about your professional journey, and I'm sure it came with some rewarding experiences, at the same time some mistakes that we made. So any mistake that you can recall from which you learned a lot?
Yes. This is very early on. Actually, this was in my master's. So it was technically pre-professional journey. But during my master's, I was working we had placements in college. And in Bombay, I was placed in a police station, the domestic violence cell. I still remember it was very, very far off from, I used to go by bus for 2 hours and reach there and then 2 hours back to college. And it was quite something. And I was working and I remember a couple was brought in and the woman was pretty much bleeding and walked upstairs. Downstairs was the police station. Upstairs in the police station was the DV cell. And I was working with the counselor there. And this lady comes up and she's bleeding and I was, how old are you in your master's? 20?
22, 23?
No, 17, 18, 19, 21.
21, okay.
Yeah, I was 21. And so I'm like this woman walks in, head is bashed in, she's bleeding, and the police are refusing to file an FIR. And now again, you don't know your boundaries. I was went down, I started arguing with them. All of this happened anyway. The report got filed, and then finally she came back up and she came in and she said, well, she talked about her experience, the violence she had gone through, the cycle of violence, came from a small chawl in Bombay. And she said that my husband has agreed to come to therapy. I mean, to work through this. I think I didn't realize as a novice therapist how big that is. And I'm sure, I can't fully decode it now, but in my head at that point, I thought, ab dekhenge. Almost like somehow it was my prerogative to seek justice or vengeance. And this person does come in, and the other counselor is actually working with him. But here I am, for some reason, thinking I'm Miss Know-It-All. And he's talking, and I remember distinctly one of the conversations being him telling this, the counselor, the other lady, the actual counselor, that see, the problem is not that she's whatever doesn't do stuff, but that she does so much wrong. And the woman turns around and says, yes, but my problem is that it's okay if you hit me when I'm wrong, but it's not that you hit me when I'm right. And my brain was on another planet, right? I was, again, you realize culture, you realize the privilege you come from, you realize you have no idea about how the world works, but you think you do. And that's where the errors happen, where you assume knowledge, you assume some kind of
power and control and know it all.
Correct. And, so this counselor, very calm demeanor, obviously has been doing it for years. And I jumped in and cut her off, whatever she was saying, I can't even remember. And because I thought I had really made up this amazing thing in my head. And I said, okay, तो आप बताएं, I told the man, I said, जब आप गलती करते हैं तो क्या होता है? Which was implying that she hit, what I was trying to bring to the table. So essentially, I didn't listen to what the clients actually wanted and needed, and then to take steps to navigate from there to building safety, security, helping her find her voice if she needed to get out of that space. Instead, what I did was attempt to hit at what I thought was a core belief and pushed a boundary not for him. A 21-year-old didn't matter to him, right? He had in fact come for this thing, which was a big thing. And but I remember her face, and her face was like, how dare you, right? Like, how dare you even think this? And I stopped because I remember her face, and the counselor next to me then changed the discussion and took it wherever. And I remember talking to her and my supervisor after that, and she said the chances that these guys will come back are zero. So you just lost somebody who you could have helped because you thought you had a principle of violence is wrong, and somehow I need him to see that violence is wrong, so let me be smart about it. So I think that was a really key learning space for me, and in just recognizing so many things about this field, about what we can do, about the impact we can have, and about the grave importance of supervision and support that is needed in the therapeutic community. And I know it even more now. I mean, this was now 13, 14 years ago when I was doing my master's, and it's even now I constantly keep going back and questioning and checking and seeing, where is this thought coming from? What am I feeling? Am I really listening to what this person needs?
Right.
And I think that is nothing more important than that.
And the more difficult question, what has been the most rewarding experience of your career so far?
I think my engagement with the people I work with, the opportunities I've got, the range of work that I've had the privilege to do. I think one of the things I've realized that was very rewarding was when I started, I trained in Canada, but I've also now started teaching at the same university an online course. And I realized that someone there who's, let's say, even 60 years old has probably seen less of a client population and less of a range of work than I have already, right? And I think just the privilege of the kind of work we get to do, the spectrum of people that are there that can be reached in so many parts, right? And not just in metro cities, and the outreach work that is possible, working with schools, looking at preventive work, communities. I think that's been very powerful. The trainings, I think that for me is very, very rewarding. Working with large groups, working on a lot of the outreach work we do. In fact, I mean, we were talking about this pre-podcast, but in COVID, I remember we started doing these lives.
Right.
And we did them for a year or more, maybe, what was it? Almost a year and a half,
yes.
2 years. 2 lives every single day of the week that our team was doing. And I didn't recognize the impact of it till I met people much after who talked about what it did for them or how important it was for them. And I feel like that to me is sort of real impact or what for me has been very rewarding. Just creating voice, and that's what you are doing with your podcast, which is that you're reaching out to more people so that more people have a voice to speak or to access support and help, and therefore, less people hopefully in the long run struggling with mental health, where we have a deficit even now of 300% shortage of mental health professionals in the industry.
Ma'am, if there's one message that you would like to give to all the viewers and listeners here, especially young minds and young professionals getting into the field of psychology and therapy, what would that be?
So I think I would say keep studying, keep learning, keep looking for supervision. Never think you know it all.
Yes.
And because you just never can. And the more you talk, the more you read, the more you engage and keep growing yourself, the better you will be for the people you are trying to help, because that is what hopefully you are trying to do at the end of the day. Take breaks, recognize your burnout, know that this is very, very taxing if you're doing it right. that you do carry a lot of load, even though you learn to build boundaries. There is a lot that you're carrying physiologically. Find your support, find your outlets, whatever those are. And yeah, please, we need more good people in the field. So by all means, keep at it.
It's been such a pleasure, ma'am, listening to your experiences and getting into this conversation with you. Thank you so much for doing this. And I hope everybody listening and viewing the episode, just like me, you would have learned a lot from ma'am's experiences, the kind of experience she holds. It's been really touching doing this conversation. So thank you so much once again, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. With this, we come to the end of today's episode. If you have any more questions, queries, feel free to put it in the comment section. And do check out ma'am's handle as well as Fortis handle. I will be tagging it in the group in the YouTube description. Thank you so much once again, everyone. See you all. Bye bye.